Hi, everyone. Welcome to the SDG Pavilion at COP28 in Dubai. My name is Ariel Alexovich. I'll be the moderator for this next session, where we're going to look at another one of the articles in the Natural Resources Forum, which is a sustainable development journal. And we're having a special issue on sustainable water and energy solutions. And I'm delighted to be here with Sebastian Groh, the CEO of SOLshare in Bangladesh, who is one of the co-authors of one of these pieces. So, Sebastian, thank you for being here, first of all.
Thanks, Ariel, for having me.
Yes, it's our pleasure. And so the title of the article that you contributed to is called Swarm Electrification at Scale, an innovative partnership model for sustainable energy development in Bangladesh. So maybe we start there with what is swarm electrification at scale?
Yeah, I think it's one of these things which we today refer to as biomimicry, which basically they're inspired by nature. And nature is incredibly smart and things work incredibly well. So we might as well copy a few things from nature and try to implement them for a more sustainable development. So swarm electrification really comes from the power of swarms or schools of fish, like swarm intelligence. And the image we had in mind is if you have those large groups of fish or insects or people, you create incredible power. You have this synergy effect where you learn 1 + 1 is 3. That's exactly what we were aiming for. So in our case, it was millions of individual solar home systems, when put together in a smart network, could create much more than the sum of the parts only.
Okay, I think that's a great intro to the topic. So going deeper into the paper, what were some of the objectives of writing it?
So Grameen Shakti, a social business from Bangladesh under the leadership of the Nobel laureate Professor Muhammad Yunus, together with SOLshare, were awarded the UNDESA Prize. And the paper was basically our way of, okay, now we have implemented this project, we have leveraged thousands of solar home systems that Grameen Shakti had installed, and put grids out of them and gave people really a new life for those systems. So what are the lessons we learned? What worked well? What didn't work so well? And how can we scale it up? And we wanted to really concisely put this together. And when UNDESA asked that they're going to publish this special issue, we said, yes, we would really like to contribute.
Okay, wonderful. And so you mentioned Grameen Shakti, and this report has a lot of different authors. Can you tell us about this cooperation? There are a couple of universities involved as well. Can you tell us who you're working with and how you're all working together towards sustainable development?
Sure. So it goes really to the roots of SOLshare. So the idea of SOLshare was perceived through a PhD program. And this was the postgraduate school for micro energy systems at the TU Berlin. And the collaboration with TU Berlin has never stopped. Hence, TU Berlin is a key co-author there, and PhD students, now postdocs, have contributed to this paper, which was also because of that important. Grameen Shakti, basically the world famous organization who has put out close to 2 million solar home systems in Bangladesh and empowered with that millions of people. So since we had that project together, we all had our lessons learned, so we all put this together and had help from TU Berlin PhD students who are really good at writing these kind of papers. And so we have all come together for this.
Wonderful. And I think the business school in Bangladesh is also part of this too.
Yeah, I should have. That's my own role. So, besides being the CEO of SOLshare, I'm also an associate professor at RAK University. It's a business school. So yeah, I forgot myself.
Okay, just want to make sure everyone's
thank you,
Ariel, for the partnership. Absolutely. So, can you tell us a little bit about solar energy in Bangladesh? What is the appetite there for solar?
I think we're seeing there a large almost discrepancy, because on the one hand you measure solar usually, okay, how many megawatts, gigawatts have you installed? And against that measurement, Bangladesh is falling short. There's only a couple % of the energy mix, like 2.5, which is renewable, which is really not up to the mark, and it's also not hitting the targets the government has set. But if you flip the equation and say, okay, how many people have access to solar energy as their primary energy source, which means did not used to have access to the national grid, but as a form of electrification to solar home systems, and then through this effort, through the interconnection of solar home systems, then you suddenly get to 6 million, which is really 30 million people. That's a mid-sized European country which is fully electrified by solar. So it's a bit of a contrast, but it depends why do you look at people, or just do you look at just sheer size and how big the panels are and how many mega or gigawatts you have?
Wow, that's really cool. Thank you for sharing that information with us. And I'm wondering if I could ask you how possible it is to scale that up in other developing countries. What do you think?
Well, first, we're really trying to scale it up as in Bangladesh as well. What we did is we have by now 130 grids which are a combination of solar home systems. The fundamental idea, and I think I should make that clear as well, is whenever I as a household have more energy than I need right now, I have the option to directly sell this to my neighbor who may not be able to afford any system. And let's say I have at one point in time I need more energy, I can just buy it. And all the settlement is done through digitalization, through my mobile money account. So the meter in our case really doesn't show kilowatt hours as probably you and me know it. That doesn't makes little sense to the people anyhow, but it shows the local currency, which is taka. So whenever I sell, I earn more money. Whenever I buy, it goes down. And with the money I earn from solar, I can buy my rice or whatnot in the market, which is, I think, quite fascinating already. What happened recently, and this we also addressed in the paper, is that the national grid has expanded and has now reached those last mile houses, at least in the context of Bangladesh. So now we have started to also interconnect those grids, so small grids, with the big grid. So now the people can even sell to the national grid. And they're really proud of that. They're like, we used to be left behind, literally, right? Now we are co-powering the country. This is really impressive. Now for the replication potential, we do see several other companies, be that in Southeast Asia, be that in Sub-Saharan Africa, be that in Latin America. We see all over, we see companies springing up with similar concepts of swarm electrification. We see an increased publications also in other journals. So this seems really to have taken root, and we're quite proud of that. That we kind of initiate something which is an alternative way to look at electrification, mainly swarm electrification, that you create a swarm which then can swarm also towards the grid, and so that you bridge that gap between being off-grid and on-grid.
Wonderful. And I do want to ask you, what were some of the main challenges you faced in implementing this project? It doesn't sound like it was an easy thing to do.
No, far from. A big challenge is really policy. Because see, energy is a very sensitive subject. It's this weird thing which is a public and a private good at the same time. So everybody kind of expects to have access to it. But then again, on the private side, you need to recover your investment and you need to price it and whatnot. And so for us, the question in the beginning was, if we have a peer-to-peer grid, at what rate do people trade? What should be that rate? Or should we make it free-floating like a marketplace? And how should that rate compare to the national grid utility rate? Ideally, it should be the same, right? But then we all know there are billions of dollars going in subsidies into those rates. And for me, it's very hard to justify someone who invests into a battery and a panel privately through a micro loan from Grameen Shakti. And then I tell her, okay, now you have to sell this for 5 cents a kilowatt hour. That doesn't really cut the bill. So it's a very sensitive area. And this is, I think, was tricky for us because we need to justify in front of the government, okay, what is the rate? And then they did, well, the main point, I think, is if household A trades with household B, the money doesn't leave the village. It goes from A to B, which is a big difference than if some external investor comes in and tries to extract value from the village, which in our case is very minimum because it's just a trading fee, which we need to keep our infrastructure intact. So that was a big challenge. And then the national grid expansion. There is a bit of a lack of coordination. We call it usually integrated electrification pathways. So who should electrify, the solar home systems or the national grid or both? And if it is both, how are they integrated? Because if they're not, then you end up with chaos. And then it's becoming very difficult. So these, I think, were the biggest challenges and continue to be now when we have like a group of people selling electricity to the grid. What should be a fair price for them to get?
Absolutely. And Sebastian, let me just ask you one final question, which is, we've heard all week here at the SDG Pavilion about some other people projects going on for SDG 7 for clean and affordable energy. Would you have any lessons learned or advice for anyone implementing clean energy systems in another country, based on your experience?
So I think my personal biggest mistake was that I thought that we are so smart that we can do it bottom up and we can ignore what is happening on the top. It's a very nice, naive thought, and it works to some extent until it doesn't. So my big lesson learned is, as energy is at this intersection of public and private, you need to be able to satisfy both camps. So you need to have a very strong endorsement and support from the government. It needs to be clear what is your role and how are you helping the government's agenda for SDG 7. If you play your own game, at some point there will be trouble, for sure. So I think that's important. But on the other hand, you can also not only rely on that relationship, but it needs to make perfect business sense for the people.
Perfect. So I would advise everyone watching out there, if you want to learn more about this particular project, I'm sure there's other pieces of advice in it. You guys can all go to the Natural Resources Forum, read this new issue, special issue on sustainable water and energy solutions, and you can go to un.org/DESA, DESA, to find this journal. So thank you for tuning in, and we'll be back later with more from the SDG Pavilion. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.